Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that.
She just started by saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump and U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris square off in their first televised debate in Philadelphia. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. With the U.S. presidential election less than 2 months away, voters had their chance to hear from Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump in what can only be described as a contentious debate. For 90 minutes, the Republican and Democratic presidential nominees discussed key issues, including the U.S. economy, reproductive rights, and immigration.
We have millions of people pouring into our country from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums, and they're coming in and they're taking jobs that are occupied right now by African Americans and Hispanics.
Let me say that the United States Congress, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, came up with a border security bill which I supported. And that bill would have put 1,500 more border agents on the border to help those folks who are working there right now overtime, trying to do their job.
Well, for more on the U.S. presidential debate, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Imani. She's an associate professor of digital storytelling at the George Washington University. Also with us, Rafael Bernal is a staff writer with the political newspaper The Hill. From Key Largo, Florida, Jadan Horyn is a political analyst, and Bill Crane is a political analyst and columnist. He joins us from the state of Georgia. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Bill Crane, the two candidates were on stage for a little less than 2 hours, and as I said, they discussed a whole range of issues: reproductive rights, immigration, the economy. At the end of the evening, do you think either of them were able to persuade undecided voters to vote their way?
We should know the snap poll, interestingly, that CNN took immediately following the debate actually showed Donald Trump's numbers going up slightly and Vice President Harris is going up or going down slightly, but within the margin of error. I think that the stronger performance by far was by Vice President Harris. So it'll take a few days for this to filter out into the polling data, but immediately she'll experience a bump in fundraising. She'll experience a bump in momentum. Her supporters were very enthused by her performance. She looked like she deserved to be on that stage. And whether or not you agree with her philosophically or not, she made her case very well, particularly against Donald Trump. And that prosecutorial role we've heard of and know of her prior career, and the 5 days she spent in Pittsburgh preparing for this debate showed.
We've seen this before, Bill, haven't we? I mean, where, one candidate gets momentum, as you point out, but then after a week or so it settles down, doesn't it? We saw that after the Democratic convention as well.
Well, July was Donald Trump's month. He had a strong Republican convention. He survived an assassination attempt. A bunch of his legal cases sort of fell to the wayside. It looked like he was unbeatable. And then Joe Biden withdrew from the race. Kamala Harris got in the race. The Democratic Party rallied behind her. They had a strong convention and the kind of media honeymoon that's been going on. But yeah, there's still time. We got 55 days. Things can shift.
Right. Imani, there were some concerns before the debate that Kamala Harris might have a problem dealing with an unscripted event, something as freewheeling as a debate would be. And there were also, of course, those who have said that Donald Trump might resort to his characteristic overbearing style in the debate. Some might call it bullying. But what did you make of the debate in terms of style and substance? Did we learn much?
I think we learned a lot. Kamala Harris has actually performed quite well in previous debates and her other contests and elections. So I think we saw her poised. We saw her incredibly presidential as she presented policy. What we also saw in her opponent was a candidate that oftentimes went on tangents, threw slight temper tantrums, and went on really bizarre tirades, most notably discussing Haitian migrants eating neighborhood pets and dogs. And I just found it quite interesting to see their strengths. Donald Trump is going to be a candidate that is going to be loud. He wants to talk over his opponent. And we saw that play out. And we also saw Kamala Harris really poised, and she was able to use strategy to get her point across.
Jadan Horyn, did we hear much policy from Kamala Harris in the debate?
I would argue that we did not. The problem with the debate was that while we understand that Kamala Harris effectively prosecuted Donald Trump, she did not make an effective case for why voters should choose her. And not only did the CNN Snap poll, but also Reuters and the New York Times afterwards indicate that undecided voters walked away believing that Kamala Harris won the debate. Mm-hmm. But it did not help her move them towards her campaign and towards her candidacy. Donald Trump is a known entity. We know that he has bizarre style debates. That's not unexpected.
Right.
What we needed to hear from Kamala Harris were her policies in specific detail and not in broad strokes, because they were only just put on her website for this debate.
Yeah, Jadan, in terms of, who came out on top after this debate, it depends on who you talk to, but Trump claimed after the debate that he had won by, quote, a lot. It's hard at this stage to determine which way the needle is going to go, as Bill pointed out, but if you listen to some of the commentaries by analysts, some of them pointed out, and admittedly these are from establishment media pundits, from those in the MSM, mainstream media, they say she laid a trap, he fell into it. She baited him and he took it. Even Fox News, actually, which is a supporter of the former president, said that it was a bad night for Trump.
Yeah, I think there's no question that it was a challenging night for the former president. That doesn't mean that Kamala Harris effectively convinced the voters to support her. She merely prosecuted Donald Trump and did it effectively. But again, Donald Trump is a known entity. This is the third presidential run that he is, participating in. And the voters that tuned in know exactly who he is. What they don't know is who Kamala Harris is. I mean, we all found out last night that Kamala Harris owned a gun. I don't know how many people that are sitting on this panel knew that. I certainly didn't. And I followed her, her statements on gun control since she was Attorney General. Those are the type of things that voters are finding out for the first time, and that's problematic for the current vice president.
All right. Rafael Bernal, in an election, in a race as tight as this, where only a few states and possibly a few counties will decide the outcome of this election, what kind of impact will Tuesday night's debate have on the election?
I think that's the important question, actually, because it is such a close election. Any nudge forward for either of the two candidates, or any nudge backwards for the other one, could potentially decide the election. It could potentially take the election from one that's decided, say, just in the blue wall states by a fraction of a percentage point, to one that's decided a bit more comfortably by 3 or 4 states. Say Kamala Harris were to retake North Carolina. It could also decide how much money the two parties are investing in other states that aren't supposed to be, and really aren't, realistically in contention. And the two states that everybody's looking at in that sense are the two, Texas and Florida, where it's almost certain. I mean, former President Trump is 99% likely to win both of those states, and the Republican candidates for Senate are, say, 80% likely to win in those states. But there is a certain amount of investment that has to go there. So it might move the needle in those battleground states, but it also moves the needle in where money has to be allocated. And there are limited resources, and Harris has had a fantastic fundraising campaign. It's not at this point a month, a week, a day. It's a whole campaign of really strong fundraising.
Right, that point you make there about spending money in states like Texas and Florida, I mean, Democrats spending money there, why would they do that if it's a losing proposition?
Well, the first thing is those two Senate races. They're the only Senate races where they have any chance whatsoever of maybe catching up to the Republican candidates. So there's that, and putting Republicans on the defensive, or just getting the headlines that, one poll out of 10 says that Harris is within striking distance of Trump in either of those states. Those are headlines that the Democrats want to see, and that force the Republicans to spend some money there, or to at least consider it.
Right. Imani, let's look at some of the issues that came up in this debate. You've already mentioned some of them, but let's look specifically, for instance, at women's reproductive rights. Harris took on Trump on abortion rights and his support for the reversal of Roe versus Wade. That's the landmark Supreme Court ruling that legalized abortion. Let's listen to them.
But what I did is something for 52 years. They've been trying to get Roe v. Wade into the states. And through the genius and heart and strength of 6 Supreme Court justices, we were able to do that.
One does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree. The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body.
So, Imani, do you think Harris will make headway with women voters on this issue?
Absolutely. I think that the two candidates are as clearly far apart on this issue as they possibly could be. This notion that we saw before Donald Trump stacked the Supreme Court in 2020 was the reality that Roe versus Wade was going to be overturned. And people were saying that anyone who felt that way, we were alarmists. But the reality is that we saw the law of the land, which he's correct, for over half a century wanting to be overturned. And I think it's really interesting, and I want to just also point out to what our other panelists were mentioning, in this notion that we're hearing a lot from media talking points around the fact that people don't, quote unquote, know Kamala Harris. And I am hearing the same rhetoric that we heard in 2016 with Hillary Clinton running against Donald Trump, where it screams to me of just a bit of misogyny, where a woman is constantly being held, in particular, at these incredibly higher standards. Donald Trump is a convicted criminal. Let's just be very clear. This man refused last night to not only answer important questions around the attempted coup on January 6th, but he also refused to admit again that he did not win the 2020 election. And so I think it's really important when we look at the standards that we're holding each candidate to, but the fact that for a woman, and especially a woman of color, they're always going to be higher, and they're always unfair.
Okay, Jadan, a quick response from you, please.
Complete false dichotomy. Hillary Clinton was the poster child for healthcare reform in the early 90s. She ran for president in 2008 and 2016. Factually inaccurate. I don't even know why we would make that analogy. Kamala Harris not publicly stated that she owned a gun.
Okay.
Multiple people did research last night. That is a new fact. Voters are finding out information that's important for voters to know.
Right, okay. Bill Crane, I want to get back to this issue of reproductive rights. I mean, you're in Georgia right now. That's a key swing state that will be closely watched, of course, on election night. But if you look at a state like Georgia, I mean, you've got metropolitan Atlanta, then you've got rural Georgia, which is far more conservative. I mean, how will an issue like abortion rights play in the state?
It's critical for suburban women in metro Atlanta, which comprise about 60% of the state's vote, and 20 counties hold about 40% of that vote, and 159 at the top in the northern portion of the state. I thought the more effective prosecution on that issue by Vice President Harris was honestly talking about women who had challenged pregnancies, that some of the medical procedures they need are in many states not either prohibited or not being happening because of the very restrictive laws in certain states that have put in place for any type of reproductive surgery. So, and I happen to be someone who considers himself conservative, but also pro-choice. I think that issue, probably going into this debate, was her strongest playing card. I think she left with a better hand of cards on the end of this evening.
Right, Jadan, let's talk about the economy. I mean, that was an issue that was front and center at this debate. Let's watch.
I had no inflation, virtually no inflation. They had the highest inflation perhaps in the history of our country, because I've never seen a worse period of time. People can't go out and buy cereal or bacon or eggs or anything else. The people of our country are absolutely dying with what they've done. They've destroyed the economy.
Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression. And what we have done is clean up Donald Trump's mess. What we have done and what I intend to do is build on what we know are the aspirations and the hopes of the American people.
So, Jadan, I mean, if we look at this, inflation remains a key issue for Americans. It really is front and center. Did Donald Trump hit the right tone there, the right note there on this issue?
I mean, sure, he brought up kitchen table politics, but I will say this. Politicians, they love to take credit for creating jobs. I think it would have been an effective fact check to remind both candidates that as president, they don't create actually any jobs, the market does. But both of these individuals' administrations contributed to inflation with their monetary policy and their massive expenditure of money. Canadians know that when the government prints money, inflation occurs. The question is, who is going to tackle it? Donald Trump did not effectively tie Kamala Harris to the Biden administration's inflationary policies, but he himself is not innocent in this scenario. I don't think either of them really addressed this in an effective way for voters. And interestingly enough, the snap polls that came out after indicated that there really was no movement in understanding what either candidate would do for the economy.
All right, Rafael, one of the stranger comments that came out of this debate, and Imani talked about it for a brief moment at the beginning of the show, came from Trump on the issue of immigration. And, you know, this issue on immigration, it's arguably a winning issue for Republicans and has been for some time if we look at the pictures of the southern border over the last few years. But this is what the former president said. Let's listen.
Look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame.
You talk about extreme. You know, this is, I think, one of the reasons why in this election I actually have the endorsement of 200 Republicans.
So just one point there, Rafael, and that is officials in Ohio said that they have no evidence that what Donald Trump was talking about actually happened. But really, when he says that, does this hurt or help, you know, his immigration cause?
Well, I think it certainly hurts him because he has all of this, what he calls border mayhem, border crisis, that if the Biden administration has managed to reduce border crossings with a lot of help from Mexican enforcement, but the results are there. For 3 years, this issue dogged the Biden administration. It dogged Kamala Harris. She could not, she didn't have good results in Central America, with the exception of Guatemala. It was difficult for them to manage. For Trump to engage in this, and as you said, there is no evidence that this has ever happened, and certainly there's zero evidence that it is happening as a pattern. For him to jump there, especially when the question, what he was replying to, was about the one thing that Democrats use as a point of mockery against him, which is his crowd sizes. He segues into immigration, could be a smart move because it's supposedly a strong issue, and then he jumps into it with language that can only be described as, you know, racially tainted is a generous way to put it. An issue that has been wholly debunked because his vice presidential nominee brought it up the previous Sunday. It's possibly the worst way to get in there. And what happens to the most memorable part of this debate is that line in Springfield, they're eating the dogs. That line is going to be remembered in U.S. political history forever.
Yeah. Imani, this debate took place in the state of Pennsylvania, which is a crucial swing state. Whichever candidate wins this state will be in a good position to win the election, given the vagaries of the American Electoral College system. At the moment, polls show that these two candidates are in a dead heat in that state. Do you think it'll change after the debate?
I don't know if it will change after the debate, but I think it was very important for Vice President Harris to reiterate that she was not interested in banning fracking, considering that basically, natural resource management and use is very, very important in Pennsylvania. And she knew that she needed to not only iterate that point, but reiterate it, considering the fact that Donald Trump brought up her willingness and desire to ban fracking. So I hope that this, again, opens up avenues for her. It's really important in Pennsylvania, and she really needs to focus on appealing to not just her base in any state, especially Pennsylvania, but really appealing to working class white men.
Right. Bill, I mean, during the debate, as we heard, Kamala Harris revealed that she is a gun owner, and she also rebuffed the claim that Trump was making that if she came to office, that her administration would be seizing guns from Americans. But there was no real discussion on gun control, was there? I mean, was this a lost opportunity? Because, I mean, right there where you are in Georgia, there was a tragic shooting. 4 people were killed, 2 teachers, 2 students. That was only a week ago.
My daughter and son-in-law live about 7 miles from that school. My daughter's a school teacher, not in high school, but a middle school, or an elementary school, pardon me, near there. Yeah, I was surprised that the moderators actually didn't do more to have the discussion about mass shootings and gun control. And there is a very stark difference in the two positions. But I will say, there have been discussions on Capitol Hill. There have been platforms in the Democratic National Committee and prior conventions that did talk about gun forfeiture. The DNC often points to the nation of Australia having a mass shooting in Adelaide in the 1990s and having a significant buyback and gun asset forfeiture program, oftentimes mandatory, that significantly reduced the number of semi-automatic and automatic weapons and took them out of the private hands and into the government's hands as a significant example of how you could handle a more significant gun control legislation in the United States. I don't think that'll ever happen, and I think that that's literally a ticking time bomb to try to touch during an election season, and Vice President Harris was wise to not go there. But I was also among those surprised on this panel to hear that she or her husband in California are gun owners.
Jadan, the Harris campaign has called for a second debate. That's a second debate between Harris and Trump. Trump is very lukewarm to the idea. He claims that this debate on Tuesday night was rigged. And to some extent, if you look at a very close analysis, which has been done by some analysts, I mean, what he says has been borne out because he was subjected to being fact-checked by the moderators on several occasions, in fact, repeatedly. But Harris was not subjected to that same level of scrutiny as he was. You know, the last time we talked, we were doing a show on U.S. politics, Jadan, you said that this debate will be a turning point. This is the last chance for both candidates to make their case on a national stage. I mean, will another debate make a difference? Should there be another one?
I think the voters should have the right to hear from both of these candidates again. And I will say this, I think if Donald Trump had done well last night, he would be pressing for a second debate and Harris would be demurring and attacking the moderators. And it is now the reverse, right? Donald Trump did not do well. And naturally, when a candidate doesn't do well, we attack the moderators. I will say, though, I did find something very interesting last night in the fact checks. When Donald Trump mentioned the gun buyback program and Kamala Harris said that's not true, David Muir did not step in. And that I actually did find very odd because in 2020, during the presidential debate, where David Muir was actually the moderator, Kamala Harris made a statement about a gun buyback program that Joe Biden himself said was unconstitutional. So if there was ever a time to actually show that there was kind of equality in fact checks, it was one where the actual moderator was a witness to a falsehood. But it doesn't matter. What matters is the performance of the candidates and ultimately what the voters take away from it. And blaming the moderators is never a good strategy. Donald Trump should just say, you know what, I'm happy to show up again. The voters deserve to hear from us and be magnanimous.
Rafael Bernal, the presidential race is also creeping into the legislative branch of government. There's a bill to keep the government financed, and that's been withdrawn after the Republican House Speaker, Mike Johnson, lost the support of his own members. Trump wants this legislation on finance to have, he wants that legislation to contain terms that would require people to show proof of citizenship to register as a voter. Where is this going? I mean, could we have a funding crisis here because of this demand by Trump?
Well, we've seen this story play out before. It has played out in different ways. We saw at one point Republicans said that they wouldn't pass a budget unless it contained H.R. 2, their broader immigration proposal that was clearly unacceptable to Democrats. And what ended up happening is that they had to back down and pass a budget. In this case, the SAVE Act, which is a legislation in pursuit of a problem that doesn't seem to exist unless you can prove a negative. It doesn't seem to be going well either. It's already been withdrawn. The most likely event is that Congress will end up, as it usually does at the last minute, passing a budget. Right. The length of time was we don't know. It might be 3 weeks. It might be 3 months. But Trump will be angry, but I don't think I'm certain most Republicans are very much afraid of creating a shutdown this close to an election.
Right, Imani, I've got less than a minute left. I just want to address one other development, and that is some of the endorsements that Kamala Harris has got in the last few weeks. One right after the election, that was the endorsement by the pop entertainer Taylor Swift. But she also received the endorsement of Dick Cheney, former Republican vice president, and his daughter Liz Cheney. Are these going to make a big difference to her campaign?
I don't know if they make a big difference to her campaign, but I think in the general public opinion and for a large demographic, it does matter. And so some of those moderate Republicans, some of those supporters of the Cheney family, it is something to think about. And then for the fact that Taylor Swift, she's one of the largest, artists in the entire world. So I think, her voters in particular encouraging to register and to participate in the process is going to be a big deal. Whether you vote for Harris or not is inconsequential.
Okay, that's where we have to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That's it. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.